present the Colorado Grouse birding tour. And unfortunately, I'm using sort of an older computer and it's not working so well. So can't see you folks very well, but I think you can see my slides. So I'll just continue on.
That's true. We can see your slides.
The tour takes place in Colorado. It's a big state. Most of Colorado, and of course, we've got half the state is mountains on the west side, and half the state is plains. The mountains go up to 14,000 feet. The tour goes up to about 12,000 feet elevation. And then in the plain side, we're at about 4,000 to 5,000 feet elevation. So the tour starts in Denver. We fly into Denver, and we do a big loop through the state, which I'll show you right here. That's approximately the 2,000 miles of road that we travel, and we do this in about 8 nights.
Great.
So we generally start in Denver and go west to Loveland Pass, and then go north, Walden, and then west to Steamboat Springs, further Craig, and south down to Montrose and Grand Junction, and back east to Gunnison and Lida and Canyon City and Pueblo, further east all the way to Kansas, where we get the lesser prairie chickens, and then come back through the Great Plains and through the Pawnee grasslands, that Denver area.
Great. Hey, and if anybody got their audio on, if you could
about 8
mute,
nights.
that would be
the next
great.
tour we're doing is April 25th to May 3rd. And, we'll have a second tour going simultaneously if we can do. It starts a day later, ends a day later. The cost is roughly, I believe, $2,800 is what we agreed on with Charles, but it might be less than that. I can't remember right now.
Right. Yeah, it's around that.
The tour includes all expense meals. And let's start our virtual tour. We'll start one of the first birds we see. Leaving Denver, we make a quick stop at Loveland Pass and look for the white-tailed ptarmigan in its winter plumage, just as it's molting and starting to molt into summer plumage. At 12,000 feet elevation. That's the white-tailed ptarmigan. Then we head up towards North Park for our second day of birding, which starts bright and early. Actually, starts before it gets light. It starts in the dark, about an hour before sunrise. We drive right up to a nice big lek of greater sage grouse. This is at about 9,000 feet elevation. There's a close-up of the greater sage grouse. And one thing we look at carefully with the greater sage grouse is we want to be able to distinguish it from the Gunnison sage grouse, which we'll see later in the tour. So look at the amount of white in the tail feathers, with those narrow white bars. Look at the phyllo plumes above the head, which are very, very fine and thin and hard to see on greater sage grouse. This is the largest grouse in the tour.
Great. Hey, Nick, just I'm going to ask a question. Can you hear me okay, Nick?
Sagebrush steppe grasslands.
I don't think he can hear you, Judge.
I don't think.
Plenty of birds and some breeding waterfowl. We get a chance to look at those. The western wilt. We see white-faced ibis and occasionally. Hold on, I'm taking Charles's call here.
Hey, Nick. The call is going fine. We're just gonna take a little break once in a while to ask for questions. So I'll just call you when you can do that. For some reason, your audio is just not working at all. We can hear you fine. The videos fine. So just so people can hear you talk, but you can't hear them ask questions or anything. So I'll have to relay that by the phone. So just keep spending a little bit more time with other nice birds in North Park, and then we'll take a little break.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, when I get to North Park, we'll take a break for questions.
Perfect. Thanks, my friend.
Okay, so we're staying in North Park here and we're looking at waterfowl. This is later in the morning after we have a nice long morning with greater sage grouse. And what you're seeing on the screen here is an occasional glossy ibis that shows up with flocks of white-faced ibis that are migrating through. And glossy ibis is a rare bird, but we usually see one on each tour in April. And it's got those thin blue lines above and below the face. And then the one on the bird to its left is actually a hybrid. It's got intermediate features between the white-faced ibis and the glossy ibis. And around North Park, we can get up into the mountains, a little higher elevation, where we see some of the mountain species, such as the Canada jay here. And flocks of rosy finches are possible. Usually we see brown-capped rosy finch. That's the species of rosy finch that breeds in our mountains here in Colorado. Occasionally we'll see a black rosy finch mixed in. These are birds that breed further west in the Great Basin. And a few of them spend the winter in our mountains. So there might be one hanging around a flock of brown-capped rosy finches in April. And we might also see great crowned rosy finch. Close view of the black rosy finch on the right and the brown-capped rosy finch on the left. Other winter montane mountain finches, such as the evening grosbeak, is a possibility. And we also see plenty of mammals on this tour, such as the snowshoe hare here is still in its white plumage of the winter. Or pelage, I should say, not plumage, pelage.
Great. Does anybody
And
have
we'll take
any
a little break
questions
for
Nick
questions,
at all?
but we move on to another region, Colorado, when we move west.
And I'm going to have to relay the questions by phone, but you can, I think the best thing is people could text the questions in.
I can hear you for questions.
Yep. Anybody got any questions at all? I got Nick on the phone and I can relay them. Hearing, I'll just ask a quick question. Nick, like rosy finches are always a little bit tricky, but there's actually how many times during the trip, how many days are you really up in the mountains where you could chase rosy finches? 4 or 5 times, or?
Yeah, so we spend about half trip mountains, and there's rosy finch possibilities for rosy finch just about every day with their multiple locations. They usually come out of the forest, so it does snow quite often at that time of year. If it does snow along our trip, we just make sure we stop at a town somewhere and you going into a theater. But also well in spots where they not frequently, and we make sure that it priority.
Great. So sort of questions that I've got, Nick. So you mentioned snowy roads, and I sort of know this data as well. You know, I mean, Mike's League used to run 4 trips a year, and maybe one trip had significant snow problems. Is that about your experience too? Out of 4 trips, you got a little bit of snow. I think you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the springtime, if it's a wet spring or a dry spring. And we do have flexibility on this tour, so if there are major snow issues, we can avoid them and drive around them and somehow make it. We always seem to make it work every year, one way or another.
Another question that came in is, have wildfires affected any of the areas you normally visit?
No, not the wildfires will not affect tour in any way. It's not this year.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have, Nick. So I'm going to hang up. Give me 30 seconds for an administrative announcement, and then we'll be there. So, folks, we are getting questions in. I think it's best to text them in. We do have nearly 50 people on the call. If you have not turned off your video, that may help Nick a little bit. And again, I would stay muted throughout and just text your questions in. And again, we'll take a 2 or 3 minute question break at the end of each major geographical area. So Nick has covered North Park, which is sort of the Steamboat Springs area. I should say Steamboat Springs and Walden area. Now he's going to move on to Northwest Colorado. Okay, Nick, continue on.
Okay. All right, so we're heading west out of North Park in northwestern Colorado. We're following the Yampa River Valley. Go through Steamboat Springs and spend the night in Craig, Colorado. Where we out there, it's a pretty remote area in western Colorado. You got more sagebrush steppe grasslands, but we also have pinyon juniper forest, and we go through some alpine forest over Rabbit Ears Pass. This is you see golden eagles and bald eagles quite frequently. And the big attraction of Northwest Colorado is the sharp-tailed grouse lek that we visit. And this is on the grounds of a coal mining area, which hopefully we'll have access to this year. Oftentimes there's a lot of snow in this area, so we don't always have access. But here's a nice close look of a couple of man-tailed grouse facing off as they dance around and display during the lek. And other birds in this area that we see are sandhill crane, which breeds in the Yampa River Valley. Cassin finch is another montane finch species that's pretty common in this area. Peregrine falcon, they provide by April, and they breed in western Colorado. We see lots of mammals on this tour, so I'll be interspersing some mammal photos throughout the bird photos, and this is the American elk and the mountain cottontail. And I'll go through one other area before we take questions. We're going to go south from Craig the next morning, and eventually make our way to the Gunnison Basin. So that's the Gunnison River Basin. And there's several other species of grouse we'll look for in this area, including char, which are well established in some of the mountain valleys, some of the western valleys of western Colorado, the arid mountain valleys of western Colorado. And sagebrush sparrow is a possibility in this area. Dusky grouse is one of our target birds, which we look for at the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park. And here, Virginia's warblers is a little specialty. They're very common, and we should see some of those. This is a dusky grouse displaying. They don't form like many birds, but they do individually display on a small territory. And in this part of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park, there's several territories, so we usually see quite a few of these birds. And then the last bird we look for in the Gunnison Basin is the Gunnison sage grouse, which is a smaller sage grouse, and it's got more white in the tail. And the phyllo plumes are much thicker on in the hind neck area. You can see them quite easily, whereas it was very difficult to see in the greater sage grouse. And we can take a break. Questions.
Yeah, so I am calling Nick again so he can hear the
Desert
question.
cottontail.
We did have one question about sort of our pandemic procedures, and I will talk about that at the end of the tour. I mean, at the end of the video conference. hopefully when people start to view this video conference over the summer, that won't be an issue. Nick and I have discussed how April looks in terms of the pandemic stuff, and again, we'll cover those issues at the end because they are complicated and there's a lot of opinion. Any other questions? Nick covered quite a bit of territory there from northwest Colorado, where we spend the night in Craig, and the typical target grouse there, sharp-tailed grouse. But as you can see, we also get some other nice species as we head south from there with Virginia warbler and chucker. And then we usually get dusky grouse in the Black Canyon of the Gunnison area. And then we head over to Gunnison itself, where we get the Gunnison sage grouse. Any other questions at all?
Yeah,
you can either text them to me, or you can just unmute briefly and do it. So, a little terrified of people unmuting here.
Charles, can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can. Go ahead with that question.
My question, I don't know if it's best for the end or now, but you asked for questions. I was just thinking, regarding, COVID and all that entails, you confident that it's going to go forward, and are there going to be, do you anticipate significant changes in the way it unfolds?
Yeah, so again, we're going to address the COVID-19 related questions at the end of the call.
Gotcha.
Nick is a scientist with the Center for Disease Control. We are both very aware of the issues. We just want to discuss them at the end of the call. I did have a question: is should we bring a spotting scope? And that is a good question. Nick, do you think folks should bring a spotting scope?
I think it's a personal decision. We will make stops and we will use spotting scopes, and we have one or two available for the group. But if we have a larger group, it would be nice to have a third or fourth scope available. So yeah, I would recommend bringing it.
Yeah, so scopes are welcome, and I do think there's a few spots that are nice to have. But Nick will also have a scope as well. Any other questions? Okie doke. I'm gonna hang up with Nick, and he's gonna go into the next thing, and we'll see where it goes. Thanks for your
now heading east from the Gunnison Basin, we make our way towards Salida, where we enter the Arkansas River Valley, and continue east for 3 miles. But some of the target birds in the Arkansas River Valley include the scaled quail, and pinion jays we'll hopefully run into some roving flocks of pinion juniper forest west of Salida. But a lot of the birds in this area are birds more similar to the habitat in New Mexico and West Texas. Birds like the curved-billed thrasher, the gray roadrunner possibility. Mountain bluebirds are quite common in this area. You might see western bluebirds. Woodhouse's scrub jay is a relatively split from western scrub jay. So that's a bird we're going to want to look for, because they're only found in like the Great Basin area of the western United States. And then once we leave the mountains and Pueblo area, we'll head out onto the eastern plains, and a whole new set of species becomes available to us, including, for example, waterfowl, such as these Franklin's gulls in nice breeding plumage, and California gulls in breeding plumage. The waterfowl species such as green-winged teal, cinnamon teal, many species of waterfowl. But the grouse targets that we're looking for on the eastern plains, we go all the way to Kansas to get. This is the lesser prairie chicken. It's got similar to the sharp-tailed grouse, but instead of having sort of flex on its chest. It's got bars. Instead of having a pointed tail, it's got a square tail. And its air sac that it blows up in its display is pink, whereas the greater prairie chicken is yellow. And we'll see greater prairie chickens as well. This is the greater prairie chicken. It's got mostly yellow air sac, and the bars are a little bit wider on the belly. We visit a lek in Kansas that actually has both species of prairie chicken. You might also see displaying wild turkeys. We don't see them in eastern Colorado. We'll see them in the mountains. They turn up at various places along the tour, actually. And we'll see shorebirds, migrating shorebirds such as these whimbrels or these marbled godwits. And we'll see plenty of raptors, including some probably mainly red-tailed hawks and plains hawks, but we might see a few rough-legged hawks still hanging on winter territories. And then the next day, and Charles, go ahead and give me a call if there are any questions, but I'll just keep moseying through the eastern plains. And actually, I'll take a break here for questions if you want to call back.
All right, so I am going to give Nick a call for questions. If you got any questions on
Now, on the last
eastern...
day or two of the tour, and we're still in the Eastern Plains. We're in the section of the Eastern Plains that's.
Hey, so if anybody
Good
have
questions.
any calls for Nick about, we covered again quite a bit of the tour there from the Arkansas Valley, which is sort of in between Gunnison and Pueblo, and then when we went east of there, and there's a morning of birding I want Nick to talk about a little bit, and then we were about to, and then on the Eastern Plains as we go into Kansas, you can now get lesser prairie chicken and greater prairie chicken on the same site. So that's all the Eastern Plains of Colorado, plus really one site in Western Kansas. Nick, can you talk a little bit about your morning of birding where you have a chance to get the black rail? And I realize it's more of a
I will. Right. So, one thing about the Eastern Plains is that there are some migration hotspots, which we'll make a few stops at to see other types of species, such as waterfowl and shorebirds. And there is a nice big marsh system in the Arkansas River that has a good population of breeding black rails. So now most of these mornings we get up very early. Most of these mornings we get up very early in the morning before sunrise, but we'll have a chance to look here. And for people who want to sleep in one morning, they can do that. But for people who want to go birding, we'll take you over to those marshes and look for birds. We'll listen for rails, including the black rail, which we should have a good chance of hearing them call. We may not see them, but we'll hear them call.
Great.
So after we see the prairie chickens, we'll have a day to wander through the Pawnee grasslands, which is in northeastern Colorado. And the Pawnee grasslands has a few special species we'll make sure that we look for, such as burrowing owl, which are quite common in that area. Mountain plover is another species. It's a specialty breeder of the area. And you'll notice that there's snow on the ground. It's usually pretty dry out on the grasslands, but occasionally we do run into snow out there on the plains as well. We see other mammals that we might see is the pronghorn antelope. This is the McCown's longspur, which is now known as the thick-billed longspur. Most of the breeding population of this species is in this part of northeastern Colorado. We'll look for chestnut-collared longspur as well. This is the swift fox. I run into a badger in the Pawnee grasslands. And as I mentioned, there are migration hotspots. On the last tour that we ran through there, we stumbled on an early great hooded warbler, which was quite exciting. And there's many other species that we could run into. And the species list is actually about between 150 and 200 species of birds that we run into on tour.
Great.
Chuck,
Yeah.
pretty much finished up the tour. We after the Pawnee Islands, we're back in the Denver area, so we drop people off at the airport. We do flexibility in part of the tour, and if we miss one of the species earlier in the tour, rather than looking at migrants and building up our species list, we can actually go back and try to see one of those species. For example, if we get snowed out of one of the mountain spots, we can go back and look for white-tailed ptarmigan, for example. Are there any questions about the tour? At this point, I don't have any more slides, so we can talk about other things.
Okay.
Okay, Chuck.
So, Nick, is anybody have any other questions at all? I've got Nick on the phone. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Now, we do have 47 people on the call, so be a little careful. Any other questions? Nick, I'm just gonna keep you on the call and handle a couple administrative things here. And then there were some questions about running the tour with COVID, and I know we both have pretty strong, I think we're on the same page on those issues, but worth making that clear. So Nick has covered his presentation. If people have more questions, feel free to ask them. And then just if for some reason we've mentioned your first or last name during the video portion of the call, feel free to email service